All right. For today's update and forecast on the California wildfires, I thought I would try something new and do a live stream. With that being said, I have no idea if this is going to work, so no worries if it doesn't. I'll just go back later and produce a normal video like I usually do. Now, one other thing I'll mention, I'm not going to be able to put the time steps for the various fires I'll be talking about while I'm streaming, but if you're watching this later in the day, you should be able to click down into the time bar and click directly to the fire you're most interested in. Now, with that being said, the first few minutes here, I'm just going to be giving a general overview of the California wildfire conditions in general. So, if you want to understand the individual fires, I'd suggest watching the next few minutes. So, the first thing we'll do is look at the satellite imagery here, and the first thing I notice is it actually looks like there's less smoke than there has been the last couple of days. Obviously, you can see some smoke coming up from the August and the Zogg fire in Northern California, a little smoke from the North Complex. Glass Fire appears to be active. Creek and Castle Fire are active, and Southern California is actually looking extremely clear. So those are the fires we're going to be talking about throughout the course of this video. Now, the first thing I like to do is just give a general overview of the three most important weather variables that we pretty much talk about every single day. It's temperature, humidity, and winds. Obviously, the hotter it is, the worse wildfire is going to be. With humidity, the drier it is, the drier the vegetation will be, and then the faster fires will be able to spread. And then with winds, that can lead to faster fire spread, or it can even lead to spotting, where it picks up burning embers, places them in front of the fire, and starts a new little fire. So those are the three variables we're going to be talking about first. And when it comes to temperature, it's looking pretty bad. There is a potentially record heat wave in effect over the next few days. Thursday is looking like it's going to be the peak of this heat wave. If we actually click in here, you saw there was going to be some triple digits throughout the day today. And then getting into Thursday, that's, I think, going to be the peak of this heat wave. As you see, we get into some temperatures in mid 100 degree range. I like showing this graphic here because it perfectly shows what's going on. Thursday, we could get up to triple digits, and then it should be coming down throughout this weekend. Obviously, that's still extremely warm. That could still be temperatures that can lead to rapid fire spread, but I think Thursday is going to be the day that we're going to have to watch for all of our fires, partly because of the heat and partly because of the humidity. For all of our fires over the next really 3 to 5 days, humidity is looking about as bad as it could be. Whenever you see humidity stay below 30%, 24 hours a day, that means fire behavior is going to be active 24 hours a day. When we don't get that rise in humidity, like looking at right now, it's 5 a.m., humidity should be 60 to 80%, but you can see it's still down at 14%, and that's true for most of California. So when that happens, there's not that break in fire behavior that allows firefighters to get a handle over the blaze. So that's why this dry air that's going to be sitting over California, this is now looking at Thursday into Friday into Saturday. But one thing you will point out, looking at Saturday to Sunday, we're actually going to get some nice moist air finally moving into the state. So I'm hoping Saturday into Sunday, our fires calm down a bunch. As you see this humidity move in, on Sunday especially, we'll finally be getting up to almost 100% humidity. That's going to be some great news, especially for the North Complex and the Glass Fire here. You can see both of those are going to be in an area that are supposed to be extremely humid. So that's great to see come this weekend as temperatures start to drop and then humidity start to rise. But like I said, the next 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, are looking really bad, especially when it comes to temperature and humidity. When it comes to wind gusts, I would say there are some concerning areas, but it's obviously not as bad as those hurricane force winds we saw last weekend, when all of our fires started to flare up again, and then we even got some new fires like the Glass Fire and the Zogg Fire. So if we click in here, you can see throughout this afternoon there will be some wind gusts around the Creek Fire area, but for the most part, August Complex and North Complex aren't looking nearly as badly as they have been. Glass Fire looks to be relatively moderate wind gusts as well. Now, the time I'm the most worried about though is working into Thursday afternoon, as we're going to get some pretty severe wind gusts working into the Glass Fire Thursday through Friday, and that's actually creating a red flag warning for that area. I would say when it comes to all of our fires, I'm most worried about the Glass Fire Thursday and Friday, as there is a red flag over the area. It's going to be extremely hot, extremely low humidity, and we're going to get some wind gusts to maybe the 30-mile-per-hour range. So that's one of the key things that we're going to be diving into in this forecast. The other thing I like to do is look at the air quality, and at first glance you would be tempted to say that air quality is pretty good today. It looks like it's a lot less smoky than it has been in the past, but it's actually unhealthy for the majority of Northern California and then some spots around the Bobcat Fire as well. Now, I'll get to the exact reasoning for that in a second. First, I want to look at the forecast for tomorrow. It's saying it's basically going to persist, that unhealthy air over the majority of Northern California. And if we look at what it is right now, you can see over the Castle Fire area, it's actually in that very unhealthy to hazardous range. So, unfortunately, air quality is not looking too good today. And now I'll get into why that is. It all has to do with the upper level winds. It's the upper level winds that really push our smoke around and clear out the air. And as you can see on this map, I'll point it out, these purple and pink areas, that represents where there's really strong upper level winds. When you get into these blues and these greens, that's where there's extremely weak upper level winds. So you can see there's weak winds over majority of northern and central California, and what that's doing is allowing the smoke that should be up high in the atmosphere to drop down to the surface. So even though it doesn't look like there's that much smoke, the smoke that there is has dropped down to the surface, and that's important because that's what we breathe. When the winds are light, and they should be light looking through Wednesday into Thursday into Friday, that's going to allow that smoke to drop down to the surface, and then we breathe in that particulate matter that is unhealthy for us. Now, the flip side of this is when winds are relatively light, that's actually better for our fires because strong winds lead to more fire growth. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. And the other positive to it is when we do get more smoke over our fires, when there's less wind pushing that smoke out of the area, it actually acts as a protective shield over our fires and works to be like a layer that blocks out some of the sunlight coming in, so it keeps temperatures a little cooler than they could be. So that's what's going on with the general overview and the air quality. Now let's start to dive into our fires. The first fire I want to talk about is the Glass Fire here, because I'm going to be honest, this is the one I'm the most worried about right now. Now, for whatever reason, my fire map was not working on Chrome today, so I'm going to be having to switch back and forth between Safari and Chrome throughout the course of this video. The first thing I'm going to point out here is that red flag warning, and that is directly over the Glass Fire. Now, that's honestly the last thing we want to see, especially when there is still some active fire behavior associated with the Glass Fire. I'll remind you, this actually started as two separate fires, but it looks as though they've officially just merged into one big fire. So I believe they're just calling this the Glass Fire or the Glass Complex now. Now, one other thing I'll point out, it's probably the first thing you notice, and it's these hotspots over St. Helena. And that was the first thing I noticed, because if we click in here, you can actually see this is a populated area where you don't want to be seeing these hotspot dots. But when I looked into the legend, what those yellow dots mean as opposed to the red dots is those are from 48 to 72 hours ago. So it's actually good news to see that the hotspots that were here appear to no longer be. The active fires right now are these red dots, and you can see the majority of that is on this northern edge here. So overall, I'd say there's some good news. It looks like it's calmed down a little bit around Calistoga as well. Pretty sure there's still evacuations in place here. As you can see, there are still some hot spots and some fire activity there. But the good news, St. Helena looks like the fire has calmed down in this area. And then also working down into Santa Rosa, that looks relatively calm as well. Couple hot spots in there, but for the most part, that southern edge appears to have calmed down. Now, where there is still a lot of fire activity, and you can see there's a lot of active fire going on, is on this northern edge. And there's good news and bad news. The bad news is, obviously, this is the last thing you want to see. A lot of these hot spots are outside of the previous fire perimeter. But the good news here is it's actually about to work into the LNU Lightning Complex fire scar. So what that means is when it gets into where there's already been burned material and a burned area, there's going to be less vegetation to fuel this fire. So if this does push into this area, I expect we're going to see it significantly calm down. But I would say northern area, definitely an area I'm watching. I'm watching closely around Calistoga and St. Helena as well. So there's actually a new model run for this using the Wharf S-Fire model. And I'll remind you, because this is, I'm not going to lie, it's going to look really bad here. So I will remind you, this is an experimental forecast only, and it doesn't take into account fire suppression tactics. So what you're about to see burned likely won't actually end up being burned, but this is just showing what this model thinks is going to happen based on the data right now. So you can see throughout the morning hours we have relatively weak fire growth, so that's good. Working into this afternoon, you do see the northern portion of this fire is expected to be growing throughout the day today, working into this evening. Now, one thing I'll also point out about this is one of the few models that actually pairs the fire below with the winds above. And you'll watch, as you get stronger winds pointing in one direction, that's where you see the strongest fire growth. So you can see those winds pushing to the southeast, and then that's where you get a lot of the fire growth. Now, with that being said, I don't actually expect all of that area to burn, but I like showing this model because it's a good visualization of how winds and fire interact. I guess some good news is even with this model not taking into effect fire suppression tactics, it doesn't have the fire burning through Calistoga or St. Helena. So that's some good news if that holds true right there. Now, if we get into the numbers for the glass fire, we're up to 48,000 acres, and it is at 2% containment. Yesterday it was at 0, so at least we're going in the right direction. When it comes to all the evacuations, there's too many for me to go over, so the link is in the description. Make sure to stay updated with that. And unfortunately, we do have 43 structures destroyed. So if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by this fire, my thoughts and prayers go out to you. Some good news though, we're over 2,000 personnel. This is up about 500 from yesterday. And honestly, I'm expecting this number just to continue to grow as more and more resources are allocated from some of our less active fires to this fire, which appears to be still pretty active. We've got 25 crews, 16 helicopters, 261 engines, 71 dozers, and 31 water tenders. One thing I will say, with the smoke in this area appearing lighter than it has in the past, they'll hopefully be able to use some of these helicopters as aerial operations won't be affected by visibility. So looking into the forecast here, first thing you might notice is that red flag isn't showing up for Calistoga, and I would actually like to address that first. You can see where the red flag is. There's Santa Rosa, there's Calistoga. They're technically in the clear for the red flag, but you can see right where our fire is. That's where the red flag is going to be in effect from 1 p.m. Thursday to 6 p.m. Friday. So the reason this is important is because they're expecting some 25 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts and then extremely low humidities. So why that's important, that can lead to some rapid fire spread, which is not what we want to see. I'll also point out there is a heat advisory throughout the entire Bay Area, as we could be getting into the triple digits for the next couple of days. If we look at the temperatures on this, you can see it's expected to peak on Thursday as we get into the triple digits. Luckily, as of right now, it shows it calming down towards this weekend. That's also when we have that humidity moving in. So I'm thinking if we can just get through the next 3 days, the weekend should be looking a lot better. So when I look at this forecast, the number one area I'm worried about is tomorrow afternoon. Obviously, today's pretty tricky conditions as well. We get extremely high temperatures, that afternoon peak in wind gusts, and then humidities in the teens. I'm also a little worried about tonight, as that humidity stays extremely low, so fire behavior is likely to remain active in the overnight hours. Now, tomorrow afternoon and working into Friday, that's what I'm really concerned about with this glass fire, and really this is the forecast I'm most worried about for all the California wildfires. We're going to be in the triple digits. We're going to be seeing some 25 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts. I know that's not showing up here, but that is what's expected. And humidity into the low teens. So that's some tricky conditions. And I know that graph isn't the best for wind gusts, so let's just take a quick look at it on this map. You can see Santa Rosa there. Our fire area is right around here. And if we click through, you can see today should be 20 miles per hour and lower when it comes to wind gusts. But then the thing I'm really worried about is working into Thursday. You see these blobs of wind gusts start to work in over the area. We get some maybe 20, 25 mile per gust. But then working into Friday, that's when this red flag warning I think is going to be in full effect, as it's going to be hot, possibly triple digits. It's going to be dry, possibly single digits. And then we could be getting gusts up to 27, maybe 30 miles per hour. So obviously, that's not the best news. I guess where there is still some good news is looking at that model. It was showing two of our highest priority areas aren't expected to see the most active fire behavior over the next 24 to 48 hours. But this is the key fire I'm watching. So I'm going to make sure I keep these updates going every single day because there's a lot going on here. Now, the next fire I want to talk about is the North Complex here. And you can see there's still some active smoke coming off of this. And if we go over to our fire perimeter map, you can actually see where that smoke is coming from. Sorry if you can hear the fan on my computer right now. I have about 50 tabs open, so it's pushing the computer to its limits. So looking at the fire perimeter and the hotspot map, I would actually say this is looking better than it was yesterday. Yesterday, there appeared to be more hotspots. Obviously, there still are some hotspots, but it's looking better. I'll also point out the rest of the fire perimeter here looks relatively calm, and there's still a lot of resources on this fire. So with this entire perimeter being calm, they're going to be able to direct a lot of their resources right to this area that is actively burning. One thing I will point out, we've had some northeast wind gusts with this one, and you can actually see the effect of that perfectly on this map. So when you get northeast wind gusts, it has the ability to pick up some of the burning embers here and create little spot fires. So you can actually see the perfect effect of that. Throw the burning ember, start a new little fire. So I know controlling some of these spot fires is one of the top priorities throughout the day today. One other thing I will say about this, and I'll point it out better when we get to the wind map, is the majority of the activity with this area here has been due to diurnal winds. And I know that sounds like a very sciencey term, but basically what it means is in the nighttime hours, the canyon cools down, and then you get winds flowing down the canyon. And that's why in the mornings, we've been seeing some active fire behavior as the winds are just pushing this fire down the canyon. The good news is the exact opposite happens during the daytime. The canyon heats up, and the winds go back up the canyon. So these little spot fires here and these hot spots, they'll hopefully be able to put them out during the day as the fire changes direction. So I always think that's a cool thing to point out, and I'll really point that out when we get to the wind map in a second. When it comes to the North Complex fire, it is at 314,000 acres. That is up from over the weekend. It's been growing mostly just in that northwest section there. Some good news with this though, we are up to 79% containment, and you can actually see where some of that containment has happened. It appears we've gained some containment on this northeastern edge and the southern edge as well. Yesterday, that was still uncontained, and you can see now the line is showing up black, which means it is contained. Where we're still uncontained though is in that northwest section where we do see the active fire growth. Now looking at the evacuations, I know there have been some new evacuations due to the growth in that northwest section, so be sure to click the link in the description and stay updated with that. Now when it comes to damages and losses, we haven't seen any increases in the last 4 or 5 days, so at least that's good news there. These numbers don't appear to still be going up, but just getting a view of what this fire has done in the course of its lifetime, it's over 2,000 structures destroyed, 2 injuries, and 15 fatalities, making it the 5th deadliest wildfire in the history of California. So if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by this wildfire, my thoughts and prayers go out to you. Now, I was mentioning the personnel earlier. There's still 1,500 personnel on this fire, so they're going to be able to attack that one region that is still burning. We got 33 crews, 8 helicopters, 77 engines, 17 dozers, and 37 water tenders. So they're going to be able to use these resources to try to put out that last uncontained portion, get some new lines in there, get some hand crews, some dozers to really contain that area. Now, looking at the forecast, temperatures are going to be high for the next 3 days, but we do see that drop into the weekend. I think key day here to watch is Thursday, as temperatures possibly up into the triple digits. The other thing I've been worried about with the North Complex here is the humidity. And that's because you can see we're in the teens this afternoon, in the teens tomorrow afternoon. That can lead to some fire growth, especially in some of the fuels that are already so dry. But the real thing that is concerning to me is that it's staying so low during nighttime. That's especially important with this one because that's where we're getting those down canyon winds leading to the fire spread on that northwestern edge. So when it's also dry at that time, that just allows more growth to happen than if this humidity was going up to 60 or 80%. So I wanted to show this because you can actually see those down canyon and up canyon winds in full effect. So I'll point this out because I know it's a rather confusing map. There's Orville right there, there's Paradise. So our fire is right around this area. This is in the general area of where we'd still see some active growth. And you can see this is showing 2 p.m. You have the winds flowing up canyon, up elevation. And then if we push into the nighttime hours, working into 5 a.m., you see those winds start to push down canyon. And especially from the northeast, which is exactly where those spot fires have been showing up over the last 2 days. The same thing is going to be in effect for Thursday. And something I will point out, it's showing some 27 mile per hour wind gusts. So that's pretty significant there when it comes to winds. And then once again, you get into the nighttime hours, those winds shift back downhill. So that's how it works. In the daytime, flows this way, not that much to worry about. The fire goes to where it's already burned. Nighttime hours, it flows downhill and leads to some fire growth. So the next fires I want to talk about are the August Complex and the Zogg fire here. And you can see these are fairly active right now, especially the August Complex here. There's a lot of smoke coming off right there. And the reason I'm doing this forecast combined is they're actually predicting these fires could combine over the next 3 to 5 days as conditions remain tricky for this area. So if we go over to the fire perimeter and hotspot map, you can actually see where these fires are. And I guess I'll talk about the Zogg fire first. You can see how close it is to the August Complex, and you can see it's increased from yesterday, especially in this southern edge. I don't think that whole area was burned yesterday, so you can see it is still pushing closer to the August Complex. It'll be interesting to see if those two combine. One thing I will point out though is compared to when this fire was first happening, remember we had some hurricane force winds, 70-mile-per-hour gusts. Right now, the winds, they're still pretty gusty, but it's nowhere near the winds we saw when this fire was first taking off. And you can actually see that on this map with the reduced fire behavior. When I first showed this map, this active fire behavior was around the entire perimeter, and now you can see, for the most part, this eastern and southwestern edge look relatively calm. Where we do still see a lot of active fire behavior is on this northwestern edge. So that's a key spot I'm going to be watching when it comes to the Zogg fire. So when we get into the numbers for the Zogg fire, it's at 51,000 acres. This has been growing rather fast. It's because there's a lot of dry fuels. There's some tricky terrain in this area, which is not good for fire growth. When it comes to containment, it's at about 7% containment. Yesterday it was at 0. So that's at least it's encouraging when it comes to the Zogg fire. We're at least gaining a little containment. Obviously, evacuations are in effect. Make sure to check the link in the description. And when it comes to damages and losses, we are up to almost 150 structures destroyed, and I'm sad to say there have been 3 fatalities associated with this fire. So it's been a bad wildfire season. I'm not going to lie. It's hard to sometimes report on all this stuff because it's never what you want to hear. Hopefully this is as bad as it gets with the Zogg fire, and hopefully that reduced fire behavior, we just see that trend continue and they start to get a handle on this blaze. You can see, if you need some good news, the personnel number is up. They're almost to 1,000 personnel, so they're gonna start making some more progress on this and add on to that 7% containment we've seen in the last 24 hours. There's 23 crews, 7 helicopters, 117 engines, 36 dozers, and 35 water tenders. So the next fire I want to talk about is the August complex here. And we'll click over to the fire perimeter and hotspot map, where you'll see basically the same part of the fire that has been burning for the last 2 to 3 days is still burning. It's this northern and northwestern edge, and then this little sliver you see right here. And unfortunately, I would say fire behavior still looks extremely active with this one. The main reason for this, there are still some gusty conditions, maybe 20-mile-per-hour gusts, nowhere near as bad as last weekend, and we don't have that red flag over this area, but you can see there is some active fire behavior, and that's because the fuels in this area are extremely dense, they're extremely dry, and there's steep terrain. So it's hard to get crews into these areas to get some good lines and good containment on it, because it's tricky conditions all around. Now, one thing I will point out, if you need some good news, the entire eastern portion of this fire and southern portion of this fire look like they're completely out. You can't really even see any more hot spots. That whole eastern side is at 100% containment, so that's at least good news. This large portion of the fire is under control. One crazy fact I will say about the perimeter of this fire, so this is the largest wildfire in the history of California, and if you were to straighten out this fire perimeter, it would reach past Los Angeles. So that just puts how big this fire is in perspective. One other thing I will say when it comes to the Zogg and August is if this actually starts to with the August complex, we're going to see something similar happen to what I was talking about earlier with the glass fire and the LNU complex, is as it burns into here, a lot of this vegetation will have already been burned out, so that will significantly slow further growth as there's no more fuel for the fire. So getting into the August complex numbers, you can see we're at 950,000 acres, largest wildfire in the history of California. I'm curious to see if this reaches 1 million acres. I certainly hope it doesn't, but if we do see this combine with the Zogg and then they throw in the Zogg acreage burned into this one, then we would in fact already be over 1 million acres burned. To put that into perspective, the average wildfire season in California in recorded history is less than 1 million acres. So this one fire alone has burned more than we typically see in an entire season. Some good news there, we're at 43% containment. I did hear there have been some new evacuations with this one, so be sure to check the link in the description. Now we're at 51 structures destroyed. Luckily that hasn't gone up in the last few days. We've got 1,600 personnel, 30 crews, 16 helicopters, 166 engines, 37 dozers, and 44 water tenders. And looking at that containment, I believe I just said it was in the 40s, and you can see where it actually is when you look on this map. Again, black line represents where it's contained, red line represents where it's not contained. You can see the eastern portion of this fire and this western area here are at 100% containment, and I don't expect those areas to be overrun anytime soon. Where we are still uncontained, though, is, not surprisingly, where we still have fire growth. It's in this northern area here and this western area you see here. So those are the two spots I'm going to continue to watch when it comes to the August complex. When it comes to the forecast, I'm not going to lie, there's some tricky things with all of our fires. The weather forecast for the next 3 days is looking bad, as temperatures, we're going to be into the 90s. It's a bit lower because there's some higher elevations places here, but temperatures still far above what they should be for this time of year. We're almost into October, and to still see nearly triple digits is rather concerning when it comes to wildfire. The other thing that's concerning has to do with the humidity. You can see it's extremely dry, but one thing that does happen with this fire, it gets a little more of the coastal influence. So you'll see in the overnight hours, it does actually come up to maybe the 40s or 50s, which is good for fire behavior. Now you see Thursday getting into maybe the single digits, not what we want to see, especially when you combine that with extremely high temperatures and some wind gusts. We can actually look at the wind gusts here to get an idea of what might be happening this afternoon. 25-mile-per-hour wind gusts. That's not exactly what you want to see. Tomorrow, a bit lower, 20 miles per hour, and then looking at Friday, around 22. So when it comes to wind gusts, this isn't one of our worst fires, but it's definitely still something to be concerned about. So the next fire I want to talk about is the Creek Fire, and I'll also mention the Sequoia Complex, also called the Castle Fire. I see smoke coming off of both of these fires, and actually a bit more than yesterday, especially with that Castle Fire there. So going over to our fire perimeter and hotspot map, one thing I will point out with this is, if you're just tuning into the live stream, big story that's happening right now is the red flag warning in effect over the glass fire Thursday into Friday. So that's the key area that I'm going to be watching over the next couple of days. So back to the Creek Fire here. Actually, let's start with the castle. So getting into the Castle Fire, you can see what area is still actively burning, and you'll notice it basically looks the exact same as it has throughout this entire week. Southern edge, which was a top priority, appears to be completely calm, and this northern edge continues to grow as it continues burning through steep terrain and dry fuels. Now, when it comes to the numbers for the Sequoia Complex, or the Castle Fire, whatever you want to call it, we're over 150,000 acres. I will say the growth on this one hasn't been all that extreme in the last few days, maybe 1,000 acres a day. Nothing to be too concerned about, and we are at 61% containment. So the next one I want to talk about is that Creek Fire up there. So coming back to this map, let's zoom out so we can scroll up to it. And you can see that it's actually looking a lot better than the last couple of days. We obviously still have some active growth on this eastern finger here, and then also on the northern section. When it comes to the western section, there are still some active areas here that I am expecting to continue to burn over the next couple days with those low humidities, especially in the overnight hours. Good news, that southern edge looks great. There's maybe one hot spot in the fire interior, but so far I'd say not expecting any growth in this area. The spots that I think will see the most growth, western edge, northern edge here, and northeastern edge, but there is some good news. As these continue to burn, they're going to just continue to get into rockier and rockier terrain, which means there's going to be less vegetation, which means it'll slow the fire spread. They're also going to get into an area that has already burned before. From the lion fire, a number of years will also slow growth, as that has previously burned out some of our vegetation. So that's kind of a story that's true with a lot of our fires right now. A lot of their growth is going into areas that have previously burned in the past. So that's kind of how California environment is supposed to behave. Fires burn out vegetation, so then when you get new fires, it slows the growth because there's not as much to fuel. So I always like looking at the Wharf S-Fire model for this one, and you'll notice they're not expecting that much growth with this one. Now, there are going to be some warm temperatures, it's going to be low humidity, some wind gusts, but overall, I'm not expecting all that much acreage burned, especially for this southern edge here where there weren't really any hotspots showing. Where we could see some growth though is where you see these wind vectors showing some stronger winds that could act to push this fire area further to the west. We also see some of those winds pushing down right here, and that could lead to some growth in that area as well. Now, the other thing I always like to do, go back to the beginning, see where the fire perimeter is right now, and then see what's expected, at least according to this model, to burn in the next 48 hours. You can see it's that area on the western edge, as well as this eastern portion here. But again, that growth should slow, and this is an experimental forecast only, doesn't take into account firefighter suppression tactics, so who knows if we'll actually see those areas burn. Looking at the numbers for the Creek Fire, we're at 305,000 acres. The same is true for the Castle Fire. That acreage hasn't increased all that much in the last few days, and I expect that slow growth to continue, especially as we start pushing into that rockier terrain. Containment is at 44%. Evacuations, link in the description. We haven't seen any growth in this number, so that's great news there. 855 structures destroyed. Most of that happened at the beginning of this fire when we were getting extreme fire behavior, but with that calmer behavior, we're not seeing any new structures destroyed, so that's some good news there. The other good news, we still have 3,000 personnel on this fire. The most, I believe, than the most personnel we've seen on any of the fires we've been talking about. 69 crews, 12 helicopters, 287 engines, 35 dozers, and 85 water tenders. Now, when it comes to the forecast, like I said earlier, this is looking a bit more moderate than our other fires. For the Glass Fire, we've got that red flag warning. For some of our more northern fires, we have extremely low humidity and triple-digit temperatures. You can see for this area, it's going to be around 90 for the next 5 days. So obviously 90 degrees is still warm, but it's not the triple digits we're seeing with some of our other fires. Now, I would say if there is one thing I'm worried about, it is the humidity. While it's not in the teens, it's basically a flat line for the next 48 hours, which will allow some fire behavior to continue in the overnight hours. Overall, though, I would say the forecast for the Creek Fire is looking the best out of all of our fires. With the other ones, we're in triple digits, 25 mile per hour wind gusts, and humidities in the single digits. So by comparison, Creek Fire is looking not too bad. Now, the next fire I want to talk about is the Bobcat Fire, but this will also be a forecast for just the LA area in general. The first thing you'll notice on this satellite imagery, you can't really see any fires. It looks like there's absolutely no smoke whatsoever, which is why it's kind of interesting that they had unhealthy air quality in the forecast. I'm expecting the air quality should actually be decent because there's not really that much smoke being produced. Now, you can see that minimal amount of smoke that's being produced on this map because you can see there's not all that much fire behavior. If we click in here to the Bobcat Fire, I'll remind you, oh wow, this is actually something new from the last time I looked at this map. We have a lot of little fires appearing to be popping up in some of these populated areas. I'm gonna have to check up on where those are coming from. Some small structure fires and nothing major, but that's something interesting that wasn't showing up this morning. Now, when it comes to the Bobcat Fire, The main area that we were talking about was this area around Mount Wilson. That's where there's an observatory, there's all there for every TV station in all of Los Angeles, radio towers, communication towers. But I would say we're looking good. I'm honestly not too worried about the Bobcat Fire anymore. You do still see some hot spots, but last I heard, they're basically just mopping up around Mount Wilson, patrolling the perimeter, making sure nothing new flares up. So I'm not too worried about the Bobcat Fire at this point. Another reason for that, you can look at this perimeter. Basically, the entire thing is looking like there's no more hotspots, so they'll be able to get the resources they have on this fire and just attack this remaining region that is still burning. So we can actually see the numbers for this one, 114,000 acres. That hasn't gone up in the last 3 days. That's why I'm not too worried about this fire increasing. There's been tricky weather conditions the last few days and we haven't seen that much growth, so I'm not expecting much growth in the future, and we're at 62% containment. Now when it comes to that containment, you can see where it is. The whole northern and southern areas are considered 100% contained. Where there is still some uncontained area is on this northeastern section and this southwestern section around Mount Wilson Observatory. I believe we can actually zoom in, and the resolution's not too good. Mount Wilson's right there though. And something you might have just asked is, how has Mount Wilson not burned over if this fire perimeter is moved over it? That's something important to keep in mind with this fact, with this map, is just because there's a fire perimeter here doesn't mean that 100% of the area in this perimeter has burned. It just means that's the extent of where the fire has reached. Now, I'm still going over this. You might be wondering why I'm even going over the Bobcat Fire if I don't expect any further growth. And it's mainly just because the forecast in general for Southern California is looking pretty bad over the next few days. So while I don't imagine the Bobcat Fire is going to have any huge growth in the next few days, I am worried about new fires starting. Now this is looking at Mount Wilson, so you'll notice the temperatures appear lower than some of our other fires we've been talking about, but that's mostly due to the fact that this is a higher elevation, so temperatures are about 10 degrees lower. There is a heat advisory in effect though, and we'll actually look at the map for that in a second, where you can see those triple digits in the other areas. When it comes to this fire, I would say the key area I'm worried about is tomorrow afternoon, as humidity is going to be in the teens. We're going to get some wind gusts. It says 20, but we could see 30 to 35 miles per hour. And then temperatures are warm. We have that heat advisory. And the other thing I'll point out, I keep saying this every day because it seems to keep getting worse every day. This humidity graph here is about as bad as I've ever seen for as long as I've been looking at these charts. You can see it's staying under 20% for a 48-hour period, which is just unheard of. If that's concerning, because if a new fire does start, it's going to be able to most likely spread for about 48 hours straight. So looking at a nice graphic that kind of sums this up, we're going to be most likely into the triple digits. That's why there's a heat advisory, and we're also going to have extremely dry air. I like looking at that on this map here. We'll take a look at the wind gusts first, because there are going to be some gusts around the LA area. You can see 25 miles per hour. Not the 40 to 45 we've been seeing over the last few days and last weekend, but still something to be worried about. Like up in these mountains, 27 miles per hour, not exactly what you want to see. And the real concern though is with temperature. If we look at this afternoon, you can see it's extremely hot. There could be some records broken today, as we're into the triple digits for the majority of this area. Looking at Thursday, triple digits again. Friday, maybe a little lower, but still triple digits. And then humidity is just ridiculous. 6% is about as dry as you'll ever see. I'd imagine the same is going to be true for Thursday and on Thursday, and then looking at Wednesday, 8%. So the reason that's concerning, just to try to sum up the LA forecast, when you have these extremely warm temperatures and this extremely dry air, that acts to dry out a lot of the vegetation. So if a new fire starts, it can most likely lead to some rapid spread. So that's something I'm going to be keeping my eye on over the next few days as these tricky conditions continue over Southern California. Taking an overview of the 2020 fire season in general, it's been the worst season in recorded history. I believe we're almost up to 4 million acres burned, which is just unheard of. That's the most we've ever had in recorded history, and you can see why the numbers are so bad this year. Of the top 6 largest California wildfires of all time, 5 have happened this year, and 3 are still actively burning. SCU and LNU, happy to say, are at about 100% containment, but August, North, and Creek, I'm expecting to continue to grow throughout this week as we're going to see temperatures in the triple digits, humidities in the single digits, and wind gusts in that 25 to 30 mile per hour range. So I'm going to keep doing these updates every single day. And as always, if you're a member of CAL FIRE or the U.S. Forest Service, thank you for all the amazing work you do. And also thank you to San Jose State and Dr. Craig Clements for basically teaching me everything I know about wildfire. I'm hoping this live stream worked. I was trying something new today. Hopefully if you're watching this right now, you can see my screen and hear my voice. If not, I will re-record this forecast the way I usually do so that this information gets out to the public. As always, if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by these wildfires, my thoughts and